Welcome back, golfers. Today we're going to work on chipping, and we're going to teach you how to make the ground your friend. So stay tuned. So when we talk about how to make the ground your friend, it starts number one with setup. And setup starts with your club. So when you grab your wedge, look at your wedge. When you're putting it out in front of you, you put it straight up and down. You can look, the back side of that wedge right here is actually a little bit higher than the front side, when you have it vertical. And most clubs now actually print what bounce you have on your club. And my club right now is 10 degrees of bounce. A lot of your other clubs out there might be 8 to 12, maybe even 14 degrees of bounce. So that's important to know. So if you're a golfer that likes to shove the club way forward, you need more bounce, because the more forward you push that club, that more the leading edge now becomes the first part that enters the ground. If we look at the club right there at 10 degrees is about flat. So anything more than that, when we come into the ball, we're going to start digging with that lead edge. So we want to use this part of the wedge, not this part of the wedge, to make that ground your friend. So that's number one. So how do we do that? So let's look at our setup. So when we're set up, we know that 10 degrees is right there. So you guys can kind of look at that angle. For my wedge, it might be a little bit more for your wedge or a little bit less. So when we set up, we need to make sure that wedge isn't pushed past that 10 degrees. And we also need to make sure our hands don't press further than that when we come into impact as well. So right about there is, we're sitting a couple degrees forward. And when we come into impact, I want to feel that I'm recreating that same angle, if not just a hair further forward, not a lot. So I'm going to give myself a little bit of a buffer, because I want to make sure there's bounce there. I don't want it to be zeroed out. I want it to be right around 5, 6 degrees of bounce at least. So when I hit the ground, the club will skip rather than dig. Our setup, after we've set the club in the right position, I also want to set our body in the right position. You're going to be slightly forward with that hip. Weight's going to be somewhat centered, if not a touch forward in the stance. And the stance when we're chipping, especially these short shots, I want the stance to be slightly open as well. So I don't want a big wide stance. I want it narrow, slightly open, and then hip bumped a little bit forward. So the club will sit there, pretty vertical, so then we can use that bounce. And then it's just a little pivot back, a little pivot through, using a lot of the big muscles in our rotation, and that's going to help us hit better shots. So let's look at that setup position. Aim that club right at the target. Shaft pretty vertical. Feet close together, slightly open. Hip bump to the left, but my weight centered. You can see my chest is back a little bit. So another aspect of setup that we really need to concentrate on is ball position in the stance. So when I'm taking my stance, it's not a very big one. So ball position is going to be just slightly towards the inside part of the right, but it changes if you're sitting slightly inside the part of the right with a big stance. My stance is very small, so the club can come up very vertical, or if you're big and do that, then you have more forward shaft lean. So small stance allows for that club to stay vertical, allows us to continue using the bounce. So if we look at where my ball position is, I always set it up just the inside part of my right foot, aim that club, small stance, keeps the club vertical, and then I can optimize the bounce on the bottom of that club. So another aspect of setup that's really important is grip pressure. So when you're chipping, I want to feel those hands very soft, so you have what we call supple wrists. when we're chipping. That'll allow for the release to happen. If I hold on to that club and do it and pull through, that's when that club gets further ahead, and then we're going to use that lead edge rather than the bounce. So my last part of setup I want to talk to you guys about is distance from your body to the club. So I stay very close to the ball. I just let my arms kind of fall out of my shoulder sockets, and that allows me to use more gravity as I'm going through the golf shot rather than trying to use it, if my arms are way out in front of me, that's going to make it so I have to use my arms, and that's going to tighten my arms, and it's going to make it harder for me to make that release because it's also going to tighten my grip and my wrists. So make sure those arms are just falling out of the shoulder sockets, nice and close to you, and the club's just flowing back and forth. So when you guys are getting your setup and you've already figured out what kind of shot you're going to hit, what trajectory you're going to hit, and you've chosen your club you want to use, really take a couple practice swings and really feel that ground. I want you to feel that club bouncing through the turf after you've practiced this, so you're not digging up the soil. But I want you guys to practice feeling that club bouncing, skipping off the turf. I want you guys to use that, because what it's going to do is make it so you're not going to have this little bit of room, to hit the golf ball cleanly. It's going to, you're going to have a much wider area that you could actually get away with hitting a shot. But the first thing we want to do is turn that ground into your friend. Utilize it, because the ground makes it so it's not scary to hit these golf shots. So part 2 in making the ground your friend is path. So when we're taking the club back and through, this is the path of our swing, and we want to make sure the path of our swing is going towards our target. And the other thing we want to make sure is that we don't preload the club head behind our hands too soon, because that's going to steepen the angle and change it, make it harder for us to change direction as we come into the ball. So when we take it back, I want that club head to stay outside the hands until we get to toe up position. Once we get to toe up position, then the club will be out in front of us, and we can just pivot as we come through. If the club gets stuck behind us, we preload too soon, then we end up flipping, and that will cause that club head to turn over too soon. And we're going to use that lead edge and dig more likely. So let me demonstrate this. Just like that. So the third part of making the ground your friend is the way we move the club head. So on the backswing, I want to see that club head come up vertical. I don't want to see that club face aiming towards the ground in that direction. So it's going to come up a little bit vertical. As we come through, I want to see that face aiming more towards the sky. So when you're coming through, I want to see that face aiming towards the sky, not going towards the ground. If you're going towards the ground, you're turning that club into a shovel. If you're aiming towards the sky, you're going to use the bounce on the club. And you can see I hold on to this angle when I do that. If you're going the opposite direction, you're usually flipped, body's not moving, and that club's going to the ground. You probably hit it thin or heavy. So let's demonstrate one and just watch where the lead edge goes when we finish. So you can see it right there, club to the sky, pivoted all the way through, weights off the back foot. So there's a couple ways we can practice. One, simple, easy way, grab an alignment stick, stick it in your grip just like that. And then when you're practicing, just try not to whack yourself in the side. If you sit there and go through and don't whack yourself in the side, You're going to hold on to this angle there, and then that's going to allow that face to stay up. It's when we throw the club is when that face starts to roll over. So chipping is really important that we hold on to that angle, let the body open up, let it pivot, get that weight off that back foot. You know, it doesn't have to have a big weight shift back, but it just needs to, you know, a little pivot going through as we're going through, which allows us to use the big muscles rather than using our hands and flipping. So try that alignment stick drill and see if it works for you. All right. So part 4 of making the ground your friend is the way we pivot our body. So we've gone through setup, we've gone through how the club should be vertical, we've gone through how that face should stay, you know, open up on the backswing and stay open on the follow through. Talk about path, how that face needs to stay in front of the hands on the way back until you get to parallel the ground. We shouldn't preload it behind us because that's going to make us so we flip going through, because I want you to be able to pivot. So when the hands are out in front of you, now the move we have to do coming through is just turn the body and shift our weight left. And this hip's kind of going back, and this right hip's going towards the target. So it's kind of in that direction that we're moving, kind of very similar to what we do in our full swing. So simple drill I like doing when I'm working on my pivot and my chipping, small stance, put a finger right there in that hip and just practice pushing that hip back and bringing your right knee or your trail knee to your lead knee. And just go right there. So when you finish, you can pick up that foot. There, you see that right hip comes over to the left, brings the belly button through, and at the same time we're doing that, you know, you're going to feel your hands work through the golf ball. If I was going to use just my big muscles to hit a golf shot, and I put my arm in this position, and I'll even hold that arm there, and as I go through it, I'm only going to pivot. I'm not going to move my arm at all. I'm just going to pivot my lower body. And you can see when I do that, it makes it very simple if we keep our, you know, body, arms very quiet and our hands very quiet, just to pivot through, make our hands very passive through the shot. So if you watch me do that when I'm hitting the golf shot, you can kind of see that pivot and that passiveness through the hands when you hit these shots. And by doing those two things, it's going to make it so the club doesn't flip over, the arms just work with the body, and then the pivot just moves the weight to the left so we're not hitting behind it. So if we kept our weight behind it back here, we're going to be hitting behind it all day long. If we move our weight to the front foot and just pivot, we'll be catching in front of the golf ball. And as long as we keep that club less than that 10 degrees of bounce for my club, I'm not going to be digging. So my final tip for you guys for today is when you're hitting golf shots, we want to make sure that our club lie angle, which is this angle here, stays very similar. We don't want that club to start here and go there, because then it's gonna change the way that the club works through the ball. So my tip to you guys, when you get set up, put the club, stand straight up, put the club inside your left leg, get set up, have that club aimed right at your target, grab the club, press the hips back at that point, and then grip it nice and soft. As you go through the golf shot, I want you to feel like your hands are almost going to hit your hip, your lead hip. I want your hands to feel like you're going to clip that pocket right there. And what that's going to do is also allow you to hold on to the angle between that arm and that arm, because that club's coming in shallow. If you come in steeper, then it's real easy to flip and get high. It makes it so you might use that lead edge rather than the bounce. So when I'm hitting this, watch when I do it. Feet close together, And I'm going to try to hit that left pocket as I go through. Thank you guys for watching this week. If you guys take advantage of utilizing that ground and make the ground your friend, you'll make chipping something you enjoy doing rather than something you fear doing. So take those techniques I showed you, take those drills I showed you, and really apply them, in a way that we can utilize that bounce on that club effectively. Remember, if your feet aren't working, your swing's not working. I'll catch you guys next time.